My name is Earl Willis Jr. I'm from the Warren County Public Library. Today is March the 30th, and we're in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And today I'm with Ray Lackey. Mr. Lackey, when and where were you born?
I was born March 7th, 1953 in Middletown, Ohio.
Middletown, Ohio. Okay. And what branch did you serve?
The United States Army and the United States Army Reserve.
Okay. Were you enlisted or were you drafted?
I was enlisted, and I enlisted prior to being drafted. My draft number would have been 7 had I waited, but I went ahead and enlisted into the Army.
Okay. And so you're probably talking about Vietnam era, correct?
Yes.
So this is, what year was this?
70.
1970. Okay. What led you, instead of all the other branches, to the Army?
Well, I had a father, and he had 5 brothers, and all of them but one served in the United States Army. And actually one of them, who I was named after, Alex, my uncle Alec, they called him, but he was actually at the Battle of Bastogne in the 101st.
Okay.
And so that's what caused me to also become a paratrooper and go to jump school.
Yeah, that's very. Would you mind maybe talking about some of your family in the military?
Well, like I said, I had my dad, he served in World War II. His 5 brothers served in World War II. My dad was actually in Anzio Beach. I'm very proud of that. And he was wounded several times. His 5 brothers served, and they didn't talk about it much.
No.
So as I grew up, I didn't know a lot about the military other than when they got together, we'd go fishing, or when I was down helping my grandfather on his tobacco base.
Yeah.
And they were all there.
And for the people that are listening to this interview, can you maybe explain to what the Anzio Beach was?
Well, Anzio Beach is a World War II location where they had several different beachheads.
Beaches, yeah.
And that was one of the hardest hitting beachheads in the Italy area. And my dad, like I said, was one of the people. He was stationed in his unit in England prior to going there and then hitting that beachhead.
Okay. So it's more or less you were like destined to be in the Army, because that was, if you might say, because you had a lot of influence and a lot of pride, and maybe.
I didn't know I was destined to go in the Army, but I think my dad and my uncle Alec and a couple of others knew I was destined to go in the Army.
Do you remember being sworn in?
Yes, I do. I actually went into the Army on a buddy program with one of my friends, and Bo. And Bo got down there and actually could not join at that time. He wasn't qualified, so I went on to basic training by myself. That's probably the most important thing that I remember about going down there. And I knew that I was raised poor. I was very fortunate. But I was blessed. But my mother was very ill during the time I was growing up, which caused us some financial difficulties. She died when I was around 13, and my dad was a truck driver, owned his own trucks and things, and worked for other people from time to time. So it was kind of difficult. I was on my own a lot. Me and my sister were on our own a lot, and so I remember going there and spending the night in a hotel. I'd never been in a hotel other than on vacation before by myself, and then swearing in and then going on an airplane to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Okay. And so you grew up in a small town, Ohio, correct?
Middletown, Ohio, and a suburb, Mayfield.
Okay. And so this is you probably didn't fly an airplane a lot, right?
First flight.
Yeah. Okay. You were probably just barely out of high school, right?
Yes.
What did that feel like when you were in this airplane? And
It was kind of maybe not scary, but just different, and you get to look out the windows and things. So, but for me it was just interesting, I guess.
Interesting. Do you remember any of your instructors at the basic camp?
Yes. Of course, 99% of people remember the drill sergeant. I was a previous drill sergeant, and Drill Sergeant Stamps was my drill sergeant. And yes, I remember him very well. He was very tough. But at the same time, he was a leader, and he led and did the things right, and he didn't do a lot of abusive punishment and things like that. So it was pretty good understanding, and I will say one thing probably in my first week in basic training, the most interesting thing that ever happened to me, my drill sergeant picked me for some reason and said, go to the supply room and get this item. I don't remember what the item is, but I do remember the most important thing. I ran to the supply room, and as I ran to the supply room, I passed a lieutenant, and I didn't even know what saluting was.
So you just passed him and
I
then
just
then
passed him,
saluted.
so I got to chew out.
Yeah.
And went and got my stuff and came back. But so I learned a valuable lesson that I wasn't aware of because
Yeah.
I hadn't had that class yet.
I know people watch a lot of movies, and maybe that someone hasn't been around the military. They think maybe that your drill sergeant or your instructors in the boot camp are just hollering and screaming at you and being detailed just to be mean. But you know no different. Can you maybe explain the reason why they're doing that?
Sure. And I didn't know it at the time, but being a drill sergeant myself, I know what they have to do is indoctrinate you. They take you from the reception station. They give you the haircut. They put you in a military uniform, and then they put you in a company with another 100 and some people. You're in a barracks with 30, 40 people that are in the same situation you are. And what they're trying to do is indoctrinate you. They want you to learn the Army way. And sometimes to do that, they have to tear you down, put you all on one level, and then build you back up in a unison as a team.
Yeah, they don't want a bunch of individuals, do
Right.
they? Do you remember, so from basic training, when you graduated basic training, what kind of training did you go to after that?
I went to AIT, Advanced Individual Training, and when I went to AIT, I actually went in the Army, and I was going to go, at that time, you didn't really get to select careers and everything. It was where you were going next. And right before my graduation, I got picked to go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And when I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, I was 13 Alpha, which is a 105 millimeter howitzer. I really didn't, that's not the job I wanted. I wanted to be an infantryman like my father, or my father was actually a tankerman like my Uncle Alec and some of the other people. So, I'm like, what am I going to do? And actually it turned out being a blessing, and I'll tell you about that a little bit later in the process. But I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I spent 8 weeks there and learned how to operate a 105 howitzer. And then I left there and I went to jump school at Fort Benning, Georgia, and was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division because they had just had an influx of people previously, a whole 3rd Brigade leave Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and go to Vietnam.
Okay.
So they were filling units, and so I was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division out of jump school, and went to the 82nd Company B, first the 504. And that was an infantry unit. So
Okay.
I got to transition and become an infantry soldier there under the OJT training program. So they set us aside. They started teaching us how to be infantry soldiers.
Okay.
And we learned all the basics of the infantry other than what we learned in basic training, and then was infused into our unit.
So the 82nd Airborne, can you maybe explain to these people maybe that haven't read or studied? Can you maybe explain a little bit about your training? I mean, I've talked to maybe one other person, and they said that they teach you how to jump out of perfectly good airplanes.
And I don't know if I've ever seen a perfectly good airplane, but yeah, they teach you how to. Actually, you learn how to jump out of airplanes at jump school at Fort Benning, Georgia.
Okay.
And then you go to your airborne assignment, and that's where you actually go as a team, a company. You jump out of I've jumped out of C-130s, I've jumped out of C-5As, I've jumped out of helicopters, I've jumped out of Chinooks, I've jumped out of about everything there is in the Army's inventory to jump out of. But yeah, you hook up and you shuffle to the door and you jump out with a static line, and chute opens up about 1,200 feet off the ground, and then you hit the ground and you're ready to be a soldier like every other soldier. It's just a mode of transportation
Yeah.
to get you to the battlefield.
from what I understand, you don't, it's not like in the movies, you sit there and think about it, you just step the door and you just jump out.
Yeah, they have a light. There's a light on each door and it's red.
Red.
And it turns yellow, then you know you're getting close to the drop zone, the DZ. And at that time, the jump master, who is in charge of the aircraft jumping people out, says stand up. They have you hook up. Then you shuffle to the door, and then you get a green light, and everybody just starts going out. There was a time in my life when I was a young private in the 82nd, then I became a corporal, and then I became a sergeant. But when I was a young person and just got to the 82nd, I was a M60 machine gunner.
Okay.
And so I jumped with a M60 machine gun bag by my side instead of an M16. And so there's a couple of times I hit the side of the C-130 because I couldn't exit enough with all the equipment I had and bounce off of it. But that's all part of doing business. And, but I tell you that once again, probably the funniest story that I have in the 82nd Airborne Division, when I got to my company and I was assigned to my platoon sergeant, I remember him, was PSG A.J. White, platoon sergeant A.J. White. And all of us guys that came in that day and got assigned to his formation, that morning we came in and he did an inspection, and we all had been, basic and AIT, and all of our fatigues, which are our Army uniforms were faded out. And he looked at all of us and he said, if you young soldiers want to wear cook whites, you need to be in a mess hall. So he sent all of us over to the mess hall to be on KP. Yeah. Because he wasn't going to let us be in his platoon with our faded out, dingy uniforms. Yeah. So that night when I got off KP, me and all the other guys went to the clothing sale store and we bought fatigues. So the next morning we were standing tall, ready to be in formation.
So like the Vietnam era, it was kind of like the woodland camouflage, like the green and the black, and yours was like faded.
Yeah, well, back in the Vietnam era, it was all green.
Green?
It was OD
okay,
green.
that's right.
It's before the camouflage,
Sometimes they had the tiger stripe camouflage a little bit. Yeah. So he was definitely trying to make you think about things.
Once again, indoctrinated.
So how did you adapt to military life?
Well, I'm very proud to say that I think I was born maybe not to be a soldier, as I told you previously. I was raised poor because of the financial situations with my mother and my dad gone all the time. And I think that it's important that, I found that way of life, and I kid people, I tell them, that's the first time, I joined the Army, that's the first time you got 2 pair of boots and a pair of shoes. I never had anything but a pair of shoes before, maybe a pair of tennis shoes. So now I got a pair of low quarters, I got 2 pair of boots, but
nice clothes.
Yeah, nice clothes, and and they're free, and I kind of teasing them, but I think the important thing is that the people that I served with helped me become a soldier. They helped me to become a leader. I'm proud to say, I was the Soldier of the Year for my battalion, my company, my battalion, and my brigade in the 82nd Airborne Division. I competed as the Soldier of the Year and became the first runner-up. And so I'm very proud of that. I was also, my machine gun team of 4 people was the 82nd machine gun team of the year. We've got pictures and certificates.
Is that the M60?
M60 machine gun team, yeah. And to do that, you got to tear it down, put it back, every team member tear it down, put it back together, shoot it on the rifle range, ruck it up and do a 12-mile force march. And our team, out of every team in the entire 82nd Airborne Division, came in first place.
I think I remember didn't the Vietnam era people call the M60 the hog or the pig, because it was just so big and heavy and it ate ammunition?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Could have,
yeah. Because this is a big, a full power, shooting a full power round.
7.62.
Yeah. It sounds like when you do something, you do it right, and you from what I'm understanding so far is when you do things, you're proud of them and you do them right, and you're proud of being in the Army.
Yes.
Yeah. Where did you serve when you left the States? Did you serve in different countries?
Well, yes, I did. But before my 3 years was up, because I enlisted in the Army for 3 years, and my 3 years was up And I had the opportunity to get out and go to school and do some things, but my dad and my uncles and everybody said, son, you need to do this, you need to stay in the Army. And I thought about it long and hard, and I re-enlisted into the Army, and I got a small bonus for doing that. But I tried to re-enlist to go to the 1st Ranger Battalion. I even took leave and went down and tried to get into a unit down there and could not get assigned to a unit. Now they have companies. At that time you went to school, and a couple of you went back and they had people within the unit that were Rangers. And I couldn't get into a Pathfinder school or a Ranger school, so I re-enlisted and became a drill sergeant. Came to Fort Knox, got me close to Bowling Green,
Yeah.
not my home, but got me close
Yeah.
to Bowling Green. And there I became a drill sergeant and stayed for 3 years, and then I went to Korea. And when I got to Korea, I got to the reception station there, or what do they call it? Not the reception station, whatever the station is where you go in and you go into units.
Yeah.
And they told me, they said, Sergeant Lackey, we would like for you to go to the NCO Academy, because you've been a drill sergeant, you can help everybody and do some things. And I'm like, I've been out of my career field for 3 years. I need to go back, into an infantry unit. And so I guess they took it at heart. So instead of sending me to Camp Casey, where a lot of the infantry units were, they sent me to Camp House, Korea, the home of the 32nd Infantry unit there, the battalion. And my sole job was to be up on the DMZ.
Okay.
And so we would spend a rotation of 1 month on the DMZ, 1 month in training, and then 1 month out in the field. So every 3 months I had the privilege of serving on GPO lead in Korea, doing combat patrols and guarding them. I was actually there in 1976 when the axing incident happened down in Panama.
Okay. And so, for the people not watching this, the DMZ would be the demilitarized zone, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's separating North Korea and South Korea, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and this is during, what year was
This
this?
is 1976.
So the Cold War was still like really strong,
Yes,
right?
it was.
Okay. Do you remember, I've talked to some people in Korea, that were in Korea, people don't, I guess, a lot of times people don't think about it being cold there, but it gets really cold, right?
Yes, it does. Yeah, we had our Mickey Mouse boots. That's the big winter boots with the big, they
Yeah.
look like Mickey Mouse because they get the big toes. You slip your boots and things into them. And we had parkas and
Parkers,
big
yeah.
furry hoods. And
Yeah.
like I said, every 3 months I was on the DMZ for 30 days, and we would do patrols, whether it was hot or cold. And it's kind of interesting because I actually, the Stars and Stripes magazine did a piece on me and my platoon, because we were doing the only combat patrols in June 14th, 1976 was on the 200th anniversary of the Army and our country's birthday.
Yeah.
So they came up and did an article on us, a combat patrol 200 years into
Yeah.
the American anniversary.
So just to hit on just a little bit, can you tell people what the demilitarized zone looks like? Is it can you tell them maybe what that would look like?
Sure. You got the highway that comes down from Seoul, Korea,
Okay.
and you got miles and miles of 4-lane highway, and they got bunkers, and they've got bridges, and they've got bridges over top and bridges on the roads, and those will all have places for explosives, so that if there is an attack, they can go in and they can blow all of those. Once you get up to the point of what they call no return, is Freedom Bridge going over the river there. And so once you get past that bridge, then you go into a holding area where you have, prior to going to GP Olet and GP Collier, the two outposts that look over top of the demilitarized zone. And that's defoliage. There's an area there that's cleared where you can see.
No foliage?
No foliage. And there's barbed wire and concertina on both sides. And
Yeah.
we've got claymore mines and everything there. And then you got a road that goes right up into Panmunjom.
Yeah.
And when you get to Panmunjom, you've got a building there. And the North Koreans will lock out the door, and they'll bring their dignitaries in. And the South Koreans will lock the door, to the north, and they'll bring their dignitaries in. Of course, when I was a young sergeant first class in the 32nd Infantry, 2nd Division, 32nd Infantry Battalion, I never got to do any of those things.
Yeah.
I was a soldier. But
So,
when I was the Command Sergeant Major of the Army Reserve, I went to Korea on several occasions, and somebody found out that I was up on the DMZ, and so the Sergeant Major over all of Korea took me and the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, retired, up to, he served there, up to Panmunjom, and they brought us into the area where they had the meetings. They
Yeah.
locked the door on the north, and you could see the North Koreans peering through the windows, and they took us and stepped us over into North Korea and gave us a coin. They said, this will be the only coin you probably get in North Korea.
Yeah.
And then we backed away. Of course, for me, and just like now, it brings cold chill bumps, because when I was there, it was hot and heavy.
Yeah.
And to even be in that building where just a couple hundred feet away where they killed those 2 officers and axed them to death, and me being part of that, it just was different. It wasn't like I wasn't a tourist. I knew what the...
Yeah, you knew the history behind it.
Yeah, I knew what was going on there, and to go up and be on a bus, and just the 4 of us along with the Catoosa soldiers and the escorts and the guards, it was kind of not intimidating, and not scary, but just
surreal.
Yeah,
Just
very
really,
surreal.
Yeah. That's something that the average person doesn't get to experience. I mean, when seeing the demilitarized zone, it makes you kind of realize that there is.
There's people out there who want to hurt you.
Yeah, they are. I mean, sometimes if you never leave your space in the world, then you don't realize that there's people that don't really wish you the best.
Exactly.
Maybe I might be wrong, but you can correct me. Were you in Central America before? Was it Panama?
I did go to Panama.
Okay.
Yes.
And you was it Noriega?
No, I didn't jump into Panama. I did jump into Panama,
Okay.
but I didn't jump in during the Noriega conflict. I actually, when I was with the 82nd Airborne Division, they sent a bunch of us down there for jungle operations training school.
Okay.
I became a jungle expert, and we also did reconnaissance patrols, and then got to do a jump into Panama.
Okay.
But I was actually in the Army Reserve when the Noriega event happened. I wish I'd have been in the 82nd during that time. I've got a couple buddies that have the Gold Star. You don't see very many of those after World War II where people make combat jumps.
Yeah.
And I got a couple buddies that have those Gold Stars where they jumped into Panama. But I actually went there on a training mission, unfortunately.
I've talked to other people that I've interviewed, and one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is your time in the Pentagon, and you were there kind of on a day that probably everybody all would remember in the United States. It was September 11th, 2001. Can you maybe explain to us how you got to the Pentagon, and maybe how you realized what was going on, and then kind of the aftermath, if you don't mind talking about that?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, back in tell you the short, long story, but back in 1991, I got mobilized for Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and I was a brigade sergeant major then, and also had an NCO Academy and drill sergeant school. But after I got demobilized from Desert Shield, Desert Storm, later on I became another brigade sergeant major, and then I became the division sergeant major for the 100th Division there in Louisville, Kentucky. We had 8 states that I was responsible for, and I got a phone call one day, and I was working at the post office here in Bowling Green, Kentucky as a supervisor, and I got a phone call, and they said, we're doing a slate to replace the Command Sergeant Major of the Army Reserve, who was a full-time Army Reserve Command Sergeant Major. He came up through the ranks as an AGR, full-time, and Jack Brzezinski, Command Sergeant Major Jack Brzezinski. And they said, we're doing a slate, and your name has come up, and me being a civilian, we were wondering, would you be interested in applying for the job, and would you be able to take a leave of absence? I said, well, let me go talk to my boss and see. So I went to the post office, and Judy Myers was a postmaster, and I said, Judy, I've got an opportunity. I said, may not anything come out of it, but I got an opportunity to apply to be the Command Sergeant Major of the Army Reserve. I would have to take a leave of absence for the post office for 3.5 years. We could work all that out later. They had already let me leave back in 1982 to go to the Sergeant Major's Academy for 9 months.
Yeah.
I left the post office, went to Fort Bliss, Texas, and went to the active duty Sergeant Major's Academy. One of the first people to go as a reservist to an active duty full-time Sergeant Major's Academy instead of non-resident. But anyway, so I applied for the job, went and did an interview. They had about, 18, 15 people. They got down to a short list of 5. I got an interview. And then about a month later, I got a phone call from General Plus, the Chief of the Army Reserve, when I was at home. He said, Ray, I'd like for you to come to work for me. And that was about August. And so I went back in the post office the next day, and I said, I've been selected to be the Command Sergeant Major of the Army Reserve, and you said you would let me go. And I said, if you'll let me go, I will let you fill my position, and I'll take whatever's open within, 100-mile radius when I come back. And so that was good for them because they didn't have to hold my position, because they would have had to held it for 3 years. So they filled my position. I left and went to the Pentagon on September 17th, 1999, and was working there in the Pentagon on September 11th, 2001, and was in my office watching TV like everybody else around the world, seeing the planes crash into the World Trade Center. And I'm sitting there unknown. Of course, they had been refortifying and redoing the Pentagon.
Yeah, that's what I was told by Mr.
Allen.
Yeah, Allen. He said they were redoing and a lot of the places were empty.
Yeah, and my office was actually where they got hit. General Lewis's office was actually where Lieutenant General, his name escapes me now, I apologize, but Tim was there, and that's where we were at in the Army Reserve before we dislocated what they were building at. But it wasn't unusual to hear explosions and different things because they were working on the building.
Yeah.
I never, it's like a train. I tell people, well, you didn't hear that? I'm like, well, it's like a train. If you live next door to an area where there's a train,
Desensitized.
eventually, yeah, you're desensitized. You don't even hear the train anymore. Everybody else hears it. So, I'm sitting in my office, and my executive assistant, we're watching the TV, and he says, Sergeant Major, he said, you need to come out here. And I'm like, I want to watch this. He said, no, you need to come out here. We need to leave. And there's people running and screaming down the hallways,
Oh, really?
getting out of the building. Yeah. And so, we exit the building, and being a leader, the first thing we do is we go to the restroom, clear the restrooms out. We go down to the top, make sure that they know what's going on. They were just then hearing about it. And then we went up to go out the emergency exits. Couldn't get out the emergency exits. They were the closest. But people didn't realize we never had fire alarms and fire drills and things. But you had to put your thumb on the exit because they would identify you. And after about 11 seconds, the doors would pop open. Well, we didn't know that, so then we had to get up and go up to another floor because we were down in the basement because we were relocated.
Okay.
And to get out of the building. And the way that I envisioned it, if you've ever seen the movie Red Dawn,
Yeah.
where America's invaded from the south by the Russians through Mexico,
Yeah.
that's what the Pentagon looked like to me. There was Warthogs, F-111s, all kinds of aircraft scraping Washington, D.C., smoke billowing out of the Pentagon. And, of course, being a soldier and not knowing anything other than to go to the sounds of the guns, my boss and I were supposed to get on a helicopter and go fly to a designated area with everybody else. And I stayed there, went around the building to help in rescue efforts.
So, to just my question, or maybe the answer people are thinking about now is, by this time, did you know it was a mistake or the planes crashing in, or you know it was on purpose by now?
Well, I wasn't like some of the reporters on TV. Planes just don't, that's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
The people sit down like, who's stupid enough to say that? I knew when a plane, but I'm in the military,
Yeah,
when a
you-
plane crashed into World Trade Center, we've tried 2 or 3 times before to take the World Trade Centers down. I knew that it was an attack on America. Not because I'm great and visionary, it's because, I'm smart enough to understand it.
Yeah, I
And
think it's important, and I don't mean to interrupt you, I think it's important that we talk about, go back and talk about the demilitarized zone. You as a military person, or even like a law enforcement, you realize that you live in the world, that not everybody loves you and wishes the best for you. So that's always in the back of your mind. That maybe if you're not in that type of environment world, you don't realize that not everybody wants to be your friend.
After 9/11, I gave a lot of speeches, and one of the things that I said in my speech was, we're a world at war, and our country is at war, and it's not a matter of if we'll have another terrorist attack. It's when.
When?
And that has stayed true and consistent since 2001. And you're right, there's a lot of bad people out there that want to do harm to us, and they don't like our way of life. And they think that when we're trying to help other governments that we're wanting to influence their way and project our way of life onto them. And that's not the case. We're trying to help humanity and to do things. But for me personally, when I saw the plane crash,
You knew what was going on.
I knew, and I didn't see it spontaneously, because I don't sit in the Pentagon back there at my desk watching TV, saying, oh, what's going to happen on ABC, NBC, CBS News. We turned it on when we got the report of what was going on.
Yeah.
And so, for me, when I was actually watching the reruns, but when we exited that building, it was just something like, this can't be America. This can't be Washington D.C. I mean, it's just
like
running through my
movie.
mind.
Was it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just crazy. And so for me, it was a real live experience. It was a bad day, and it's something that you don't want to go through, because as a soldier you're trained, and you know that if you go into a battlefield that you're going to risk your life.
Yeah, it's
but for
always-
somebody to attack you on your soil in the Pentagon and kill innocent women and children, and soldiers that are just sitting there doing their job, not there to be in combat environments. They were in their dress greens and in their Army B uniform. They weren't in their BDUs and their camouflage.
Yeah.
They weren't going to war that day. They were going to work in a federal building. And that's the sad thing.
Yeah. And so I think that's what I've got most so far is everybody I remember maybe everybody at home that saw that, or maybe in we'll call them the civilian world or whatever, they was like, oh no, somebody got lost and they crashed into the air, but you're thinking, that's, people don't just do that. I mean, I think it was 1992 or 3 that they tried to blow the World Trade Center up. I mean, this is not the first time.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that's one thing that I've taken away, that people have a different way of looking at things, and you've been maybe in the world of being the real world, that you understand that not everybody has your best.
Yeah. And if I could interject, being in my job, I was in a position to where I got to see things and do things that other people didn't get to do. And number one, me and the Sergeant Major of the Army, the Sergeant Major of the Army, National Guard, the 3 senior guys, enlisted guys in the entire Army structure, went to New York City 3 days after the event in the Chief's Black Hawk helicopter. And we landed there in Battery Field and got to go in, and there was soot. I mean, we had our boots on, we had helmets on, we had masks, hazmat material, because the soot, as you got closer, was inches, then 6 inches, then a foot deep. The soot on the windowsills was a foot deep. It was just really bad.
Yeah. I've seen people after they just were covered like with just soot.
Yeah.
And I think to me, that was a war zone.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to do through these interviews, that you can read, like I've said before, you can read books or you can hear things on television, but to talk to somebody that's actually there and seeing it happen, that to me is more important.
Yeah, and I think 2 of the most important things in my life that happened right after 9/11. Number one, I got the privilege to sit on the the task force there for the in the war room, the Army's war room. So we would go in every morning and every afternoon, and we would see firsthand what was going on in the military. We wouldn't, but the staff there would X off who they had killed, X off which aircraft they had eliminated, which surface to air missiles they had eliminated, and we got to watch that every day as we prepared to go to war. And at the same time, we got to bury our dead. We had Army reservists that died that day in the Pentagon. Yeah. And Chief and I presented flags to those family members in Arlington Cemetery. And then the second, probably greatest thing that happened was the Army Reserve was called on to bring in the 311 Mortuary Affairs Unit out of Puerto Rico. And if you haven't seen that, the people viewing haven't seen that, they were just a unit in Puerto Rico. A lot of those kids were there getting college funds and educations, and they were called up in one day by President Bush through the Army Reserve, and we flew them in to Dover Air Force Base. I met them there, put them on a bus, sent them to Fort Myer in Arlington, Virginia. We weren't even prepared to put them in barracks. We had to put them in racquetball courts. 2 racquetball courts for the men, 1 racquetball court for the women, with cots and sleeping bags. And they would live that way for several weeks. But their task was to go into the Pentagon every morning and to identify the remains of the dead and the people and the items that were left behind, and categorize them so that the loved ones could get those items afterwards. And a lot of those kids seen a lot of things that they shouldn't have to see. And I made sure that each and every one of them was evaluated before they left going back home. Yeah. And we kind of surprised them. I went to meet them as they left Washington, D.C. at Dover Air Force Base as they were flying off. I got on a plane and beat them to Puerto Rico, and the governor of Puerto Rico and the commander of the unit, we had a big coming home ceremony for them there at a baseball field, and it's just amazing because they served with distinction and honor, and President Bush actually came to visit them in the Pentagon, and I got to escort him to see them. And I had friends call me and say, "Hey, saw you on CNN today," and I'm like, "You did? I didn't know I was on CNN." So when we were there testifying with the Sergeant Major of the Army, they'd call me and tell me that, but on that day, I had the privilege of escorting him out to see the 311 quartermaster soldiers that were actually working.
Yeah. And to comment on that is I don't know if people watching this realize is even though you're not in combat, when you see something like that, when you see bodies that it leads to things like PTSD, and it changes your life. So I think that was good that you addressed that, and you realized that these people saw stuff that they'll always remember, and you cared about their well-being.
Well, not to gross people out on the camera, but that first day we had young kids going in there suited up in their hazmat outfits and with their respirators and their masks on and everything, and they'd get sick. They'd see things that they'd never seen before, and they'd have to come out and wash their mask off but they'd go right back into the fold. Yeah. And it's sad that they had to do that, but unfortunately that was their job. As an Army reservist, if ever needed, they would be called upon, and they were called upon.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, like I said, that's real life. That sometimes you see things that are just horrible, and everything's not, pretty. We like pretty things, but this is one of the reasons why I'm interviewing you and all the other veterans, that you see things, and sometimes you have to do things that are not nice and pleasant, so we can live in a free country.
Exactly.
So I really, that's really something I want to bring home. And so after all this, you said you retired in 2003?
2002.
2002. So after 2002, does your family live in Washington, D.C., or did you?
We lived in Washington, D.C. We were at Fort Myers. We were in designated quarters there for the Sergeant Major of the Army Reserve. And so when we came back, our stuff was placed in storage. I went to Fort Knox. I actually was selected to be the postmaster of Fort Knox And I stayed there until Judy, my boss, retired, and then I was selected, fortunately, to come back to Bowling Green, Kentucky as the postmaster.
Okay.
As a 35th postmaster of Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Okay.
And I was there from like I said, I was on terminal leave. I left the Pentagon in October, but then I was on leave till February. It was November the 1st maybe. But anyway, my change of responsibility is the end of October. So November, December, January, I was on leave because I said I didn't get to use a lot of my leave when I was in that job. I was all over the world, 35 different countries. But I went back and I was a postmaster at Fort Knox, then came back to Bowling Green as the postmaster of Bowling Green.
And so is being a real high enlisted soldier, how is that, you think, carried over to your civilian life?
Well, and I think it does both ways. When I went to work at the Postal Service, I was a city letter carrier. And being in the military, I've been like I said, I've been a private, I've been a team leader, I've been a squad leader, I've been a platoon sergeant, I've been a first sergeant. So I had those leadership skills, and I was actually a platoon sergeant when I got out of the Army and went to work at the post office. I hadn't reached the level of first sergeant. So they intertwine. And so I was being successful in the post office. I wanted to, in the Army, so I wanted to do more. So I became a part-time supervisor, then a full-time supervisor, and then I became a supervisor of customer services, a superintendent of window services. And so as you gain your career in the Postal Service, I also gained my career in the Army Reserve. And they were plateauing at different levels. And so for me, what I had to understand real quickly was that, and this goes for Army Reservists, and everybody, you working in your job, your job is not to please your boss. Your job is to do your job. And I had to make sure that both my two-star general I worked for in the 100th Division and my postmaster I worked for in Bowling Green, Kentucky understood that I was going to do my job, whatever it was. But if I had to be somewhere, like during a rural mail count at the post office or a PT test at the Army Reserve Unit, then I had to make a choice. And I was going to make the choice to where it would benefit the unit that I need to be at the most. And I would never let both units down. And they both understood that. They understood that I was going to do what was right for both organizations.
Yeah, I think that so far when I've listened to you talk, when you do something, you do it right.
Try to.
Yeah, and I think I've talked to everybody that I've talked to, interviewed so far, that when you were on your job, you probably didn't show up late, probably did.
Never.
So yeah, and that's the thing that everybody I've interviewed so far, they were on time for the interview or they were early.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing that I've never been in the military, but my father has, and I've been around my whole life, and that's why I'm always 20 minutes early for work. Mm-hmm. And so you're on time, and yeah, that's what I like most about you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so now you're the postmaster. You're retired?
I'm retired.
Okay.
I actually retired about 8 years ago from the post office.
So when you were the postmaster, you were a supervisor over people, correct?
I was a supervisor, and when I became the postmaster, I had 5 supervisors and 186 employees here in Warren County.
So that was probably an old hat to you, because you've been in charge of people, and needless to say, you probably maybe I'm overstepping, but you probably did a whole lot better job than somebody who never been in the military.
Well, my boss, Judy, she was a great...
Yeah. Not saying that she wasn't doing a good job.
And she took care of me,
Yeah.
and the previous postmasters always did a good job. I don't think you have to be in the military to do a good job. You just have to have that, desire and the want and the need to do a good job. But for me, what was important coming back to Bowling Green was that I grew up at the Bowling Green Post Office. I'd been there as a carrier. I'd been there as a supervisor. I'd hired a lot of the people there. And the reason I came back, instead of, I could have sat at Fort Knox and been the postmaster of Fort Knox, a retired Command Sergeant Major Army Reserve, and been loving life, because they had the protocol issues at Fort Knox, and I had the post office there too. But, I wanted to come home. I wanted to help Bowling Green. I wanted to help the community. I wanted to help the employees.
Okay. So it sounds like you like Bowling Green.
I do.
Yeah. Do you still live in Bowling Green here?
I still live in Bowling Green.
Okay. In closing, just to ask you a couple more questions. How has the military impacted your feelings about war and military in general?
I think that it has, I mean, and I can't really, disseminate the difference, but I don't think, all I've known is the military since I was 17. So I can't say, well, it's impacted me this way or it's impacted me that way. I think that it's giving me an understanding of people. It's given me an understanding of government. I've seen, I went from being a soldier to a visionary, because when you're running the Army Reserve with the chief of the Army Reserve, and you're not dealing with millions of dollars, now you're dealing with billions of dollars, and you're not dealing with 8 states, you're dealing with the United States and 35 different countries. We had soldiers in 35 different countries, and I was responsible for 205,000 soldiers and their families. It was a big responsibility, and so what that has given me was a desire, and the desire was to make sure that I did the most that I could to help people. And when I was at the post office, I think it transitioned over, because there was a lot of people that I worked with at the post office that I think liked me. I wasn't there to be liked, I was there to do my job, but there was a lot of people that liked me. The ones that didn't like me, just like in the military, are the ones that, you ask them to do their job, you tell them to do their job, you make them do their job. And if they don't do it, you take corrective action. And, and those are the ones that seem to be the most bitter. And sometimes you have to go all the way to a removal of a job. And that's what I think I've found the most important in my leadership role today is that being empathetic. Placing your, somebody said 20 years ago, how empathetic are you? I said, well, if I was in your shoes, I'd shine them. But today, empathy goes a long way. If I was at the post office in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and somebody did something really wrong, my job is to take the corrective action and to make sure they understand the circumstances, the results for their actions, and what I have to do. But if at all possible, keep that employee and make them a better person, make them a better employee, and because I don't have to pay the money to retrain somebody and do all that. And I think that's probably the greatest lesson that I've learned is that, because, people go to work like you 20 minutes earlier in the morning, people don't leave their house want to be a bad employee. Sometime between the time they get in the car until after they clock on, they just form this habit or this attitude, or they meet up with somebody, I can take an extra 15 minutes for lunch, or, it's not, I don't think it's a willful intent, it's just something that happens. And if it is a willful intent, we do need to get rid of it.
You think it might be like a slippery slope? You do one thing and it just kind of leads to another, and you just kind of...
Or like you're on the driving a car down the road, are you on the dotted line, or are you in your lane? Or do you cross over to pass someone in a double yellow line, which you can't do? You're going to get a ticket if you speed. The same scenario. It's people tend to do things maybe that they know they can get away with. But my job during that time period, and in everything that I did, was try to help them out. They didn't understand it at the time. They thought I was being mean, maybe, and ugly. But you can't let things go. And then, if you, what they say, if you ask for something and you get the same results, you're not fixing anything.
No, I think you touched on something that maybe that people don't understand sometimes is people do things they think they can get away with, and that relates to evil people. Sometimes do things they think they can get away with, whether they invade a country, or they do evil things, whether they do terrorist things. And if you sometimes, if you don't stand up to somebody, whether it's not pleasant and it's not fun thing to do, then just bad things happen.
Well, 2 things my dad told me when I was growing up, and I don't remember a lot of it, but 2 things he did tell me. He told me, he said, son, a lock doesn't keep an honest person honest. If somebody wants to break into that lock, they're going to do it. It does keep an honest person honest. It's not going to, deter a thief. No. And then the other thing was, we were working on a car one day, my car, and first car I ever owned, and I was having a problem getting the bolt off. And he said, looked at me and he said, son, you're gonna let a little bolt kick your butt. He used a different word, but
Yeah.
you know, and he said, you know, you got to get that bolt off, you know, because I was getting depressed and
Frustrated,
and angry. And he said, don't do that. Just it'll be all right. You know, spray a little bit of this on there, and we'll get it off.
Sounds like you had a
and
smart
go on.
dad.
Yeah, you know, I've been blessed. I've had a lot of, I've been in a lot of places, good places. I've been, as you can see, I've been to some bad places, you know, at the wrong place at the right time. You know, I wasn't supposed to be in a war zone on 9/11, but I was. I wasn't supposed to be, you know, in an altercation in Korea in June of 1976, but I was. But so I always tend to be in the wrong place at the right time, but maybe God put me there for a reason.
Yeah.
To help people in those situations. That's what I think.
Yeah.
And so you know, the only thing that I can say, and we're talking to a lot of people, veterans hopefully and stuff, is that, you know, I know they're trying to work on the VA.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because, you know, I've had some issues after 9/11 and I wear hearing aids.
Yeah.
And, you know, it seems like you know, out of all the frustration I've ever had serving in the military, sometimes it doesn't compare to the frustration that the bureaucracy and the VA gives you.
Yeah,
I know there's guidelines there because I saw a story just yesterday where a guy, you know, was going to have to pay back $1.2 million because, and his wife and him was going to jail for 33 months because she'd push him into the VA hospital in a wheelchair. Well, he went to work every day. You know, and that's why they've got those guidelines. But I hope someday they help veterans do what they need to do and give them what they need.
Yeah, well, I can speak from a family member that goes to VA that it's not what it should be, and it should be fixed.
Yeah.
And that's the least that our country can do for people it's served, whether it's help them out with their things that people see a lot of times that someone loses an arm or leg or, you know, but sometimes there's issues where you can't see something in their mind. And you know, there's a lot of times where, you know, sadly that people in the military, they feel like they can't get any hope and they're hopeless and they end their life. And so that I hope that's really fixed. That needs to be fixed.
And that's one thing I'd just like to say in closing.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time and I really appreciate your service. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.